Hi, my name is Courtney and I've decided to make my BCM390 short about euthanasia. Euthanasia is known as the means to take a deliberate action with the express intention of ending a life to relieve intractable or persistent suffering. However, there are two procedural classifications of euthanasia available, such as active euthanasia, which refers to the deliberate act of intentional administration of lethal drugs to end a terminally ill patient's life. The second one is passive euthanasia, where life-sustaining treatments are withheld, but this method is not clear-cut in the slightest. Passive euthanasia can best be explained through examples, such as if a doctor prescribes increasing amounts of strong pain-killing medications which will eventually become toxic to the patient. However, there are arguments as to whether or not that is passive euthanasia. There are also two classifications of euthanasia, known as voluntary and involuntary euthanasia. Voluntary euthanasia is euthanasia conducted with consent of the patient. Involuntary euthanasia is conducted without consent, and the decision is made by another person, such as a primary carer, because the patient is incapable of making it themselves. My media item is going to be a case within Australia where an elderly couple ordered euthanasia drugs off the internet and tried to take their lives with them. Heinz Klinkerman, who is 81, was his wife Beryl's, who was 71, primary carer and had been so for many years since her health took a turn for the worst in 2007. Realizing that his wife's health was in steep decline due to Parkinson's and dementia, Heinz took matters into his own hands in 2013 and bought drugs online for the both of them to die together. His plan was that they would fall asleep together and never wake up, but they were found unconscious and both recovered in hospital. Heinz was charged with attempted murder and given a community corrections order of 18 months. This sentence was chosen in order to be a deterrent for taking this kind of action, as well as an order from the judge to be banned from ever seeing his wife. I feel like this media item highlights the complexities that surround euthanasia, whether they be from a legal standpoint or from a cultural standpoint. It is because of these complexities that this is what makes euthanasia a controversial issue, as many people have differing opinions about what was the right course of action about euthanasia, as well as what was the right course of action in that case. According to the defense lawyer, Heinz was very stubborn and refused palliative care for his wife, apart from a nurse coming into their home 3 times a week. Would this case have turned out differently if he had accepted the help that was available, or would it have prolonged the suffering of his wife? People who are for the legalization of euthanasia within Australia argue that this case wouldn't have even happened had euthanasia become legalized within our nation. Australia is one of the many countries around the world who do not wish to make euthanasia legal within their country. There have been several attempts through legislation to change this nationwide. However, these legislative attempts have been unsuccessful, apart from the Northern Territory where active euthanasia is legal. Many believe that it hasn't been legalized due to competing moral and ethical values within the nation. However, this doesn't mean that it is illegal everywhere. Countries such as Belgium, Luxembourg and the Netherlands have legalized euthanasia, and the laws put in place in these countries are firm. There are many conditions that must be met in the Netherlands, for example. The doctor must be convinced that the patient has made a voluntary and well-considered request to die, as well as being convinced that the patient is facing unendurable suffering and has to have informed the patient about his situation and prospects. It is because of these conditions that the doctor makes sure the patient is aware of what they're asking and whether or not they're in that much pain that they feel it is too hard for them to go on. In the Netherlands, voluntary euthanasia and assisted suicide are still criminal offences, but it is a win for those who are advocating for euthanasia to be legalised within their country. Euthanasia advocates argue that people have the right to make their own decisions regarding their own death, and that death is a private matter. If there is no harm to others, the state and other people have no right to interfere. They also argue that euthanasia is intended to get rid of their pain and suffering, therefore being sometimes described as mercy killing. The term mercy killing can be applied to an ethical debate between the utilitarians and the Kantians. John Stuart Mill, who came up with the theory of utilitarianism, believes that the actions are right, as they tend to promote happiness, and they are wrong when they tend to produce pain or reverse the process of happiness. Happiness for him means for the greater good of the community. And the rule utilitarianism states that you must follow the rules even if it doesn't lead to the greatest outcome for the individual at the time. However, Immanuel Kant, who is the Kantianisms, the Kantians, believes that you cannot use human beings as a means to an end as it is not morally correct. Utilitarian theory is believing that the best moral action is the one that maximizes utility. Utilitarians believe that they weigh the circumstances of an issue and then do what is best for the community or for the greater good. Utilitarian theory leaves no room for leeway if it comes down to the individual, and considering euthanasia does rely on the individual, it is possible to determine whether or not what the greater good is based on everyone else's opinion about what the greater good would be. Kantians don't believe in exceptions into creating universal laws. Something is either right or wrong regardless of circumstances. Kantians believe that we are all rational men and should act as such. The philosopher Immanuel Kant said that rational human beings should be treated as an end to them and as an end in themselves and not as a means to something else. The fact that we are human has value in itself. Kant believed that we must act in ways that do not disrespect our fellow human beings and ourselves, and the act of euthanasia is dehumanizing. He argues that people are entrusted with their lives, which have a unique value, and by taking matters into your own hands, such as euthanasia, you are devaluing yourself and making yourself into something like a beast. These two ethical theorists are an interesting way to look at euthanasia and how many people view it from an ethical standpoint. As ethics impact moral decisions, it is interesting to see what people think is the right way to die. It is clear that this issue divides people into very clear camps. Those against euthanasia have very strong opinions about it. There are ethical and practical arguments for this. Ethical arguments for being against euthanasia, according to the BBC, include that it weakens society's respect for the sanctity of life, openly accepts that some lives of the disabled and sick are worth less than others, and can be a slippery slope that leads to involuntary euthanasia orders and the killing of people who are thought undesirable within society. Practical arguments for being against euthanasia include that there is no way to properly regulate euthanasia, and if there was a way to regulate it, it would be very difficult. They also argue that euthanasia is not necessary if there is proper palliative care being done in the final stages of life, which will effectively make euthanasia useless. And once allowing euthanasia to be within our society, this will lead to less good care for the terminally ill and undermine the rights of vulnerable patients, which could potentially include coercion of patients who receive costly treatment to accept euthanasia. The topic of euthanasia and whether or not it should be legal is a complex issue from an ethical and a practical standpoint. Although my media item makes it clear that people are taking their lives into their own hands, it is still a crime within Australia. Whether or not legalisation or better palliative care needs to happen within Australian society, it is clear something needs to be done, especially when you take into account Australia's ageing population. Thank you for listening to my short. I hope you have a good day.